Hi, and welcome to the Future of Dermatology podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Farah Kamangar, board certified dermatologist. We are here to talk about anything and everything dermatology related. You'll hear from me and my guests who are dermatologists, physicians, experts, scientists, residents, and medical students in the field of dermatology. We publish weekly, so if you like what you hear, hit that subscribe button and show us some love, and thank you for joining us.
Hi, we are so excited for today's episode. We have Shawn Thomas here, who is going to share with us his journey as a psoriasis patient, but also as a co-founder of Solay, which is a home Goeckerman therapy, which is fantastic and so innovative. So Shawn, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Kamangar. It's good to be here with you.
Yeah, and I'd love to just hear your story. You could start anywhere and share as little or as much as you like, but I'd love to just hear your story about how you were diagnosed with psoriasis, when it all started, what your journey has been going through everything, and how it led you to all the amazing work you're doing now.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess my psoriasis journey started in 2017. I had I thought it was like a rash or like nummular eczema or something. And so I didn't think too much of it and just put a lot of lotion and Vaseline and hoped that it'd go away. And over the course of like 7 or 8 months, it started getting worse and worse. So it presented itself as these scaly plaques that started popping up all over my legs, got into my arms, got into my chest, and it eventually got onto my face. And so at that point, it was like May of 2018, and it was harder to hide my psoriasis. And so it was at that point when I finally was like, okay, let me go see a dermatologist and actually see what is going on here. Because I thought
Yeah.
maybe if I got past the winter, it would go away, but even in the summer months, it was still getting worse. And so I went to go see my dermatologist, and they did a biopsy, and they said it was plaque psoriasis. So that was tough because I
Yeah.
remember looking it up because I wasn't really familiar with what psoriasis was,
Yeah.
and then it was like, oh, this is an incurable disease, and I was like, oh, that's unfortunate. And so
Actually, that's an amazing point you bring up, and I'd love to even talk to you more about that because I always
yeah,
wonder in clinic because our clinic our appointment times are very short, they're like 10, 15 minutes. And sometimes I'll diagnose someone for the first time with psoriasis and they'll say, great, so give me the thing that takes it away, like everything else we've had, right? Like just give me the
yeah,
little antibiotics or the cream and it'll be gone in a week. And then we very quickly brush upon, well, it probably will need, long-term maintenance therapy, which to us seems like a benign enough thing just to say really quickly. But then I've talked a lot about my patients over time about this, that hearing for that first time that you now have something that you didn't before, that you now have to kind of deal with for the rest of your life. Like I'd like to just hear your thoughts about that. Like what were you thinking at the time when just finding the chronicity of it?
yeah. No, it's a bit of a blow, I think, because I I was lucky enough in terms of my health that I didn't have anything significant where I needed like chronic care. And
Yeah,
so
yeah.
for that to change and kind of like accept my own, I guess, mortality and vulnerability, and the fact that my body was somehow misfiring in some way, it was, yeah, it was really jarring. And I think any time you have one of those moments that it's like, hey, this thing is going to impact you for the rest of your life potentially, it's it requires a lot of like self reflection of like and kind of like inner exploration of like what is now this does this disease is this part of my identity now? Do I need to? Am I always going to be reminded of it every time I step out of a shower and see the redness on my skin? Is people going to judge me differently? Are they? Because a lot of people don't know what psoriasis is. Will they think that it's contagious? And do I have to explain myself constantly? So it's kind of like yeah, it is kind of an inflection point of there was pre-psoriasis and then post-psoriasis in terms of having to manage it myself, and also like how do I present myself to other people, and like how do I
Yeah.
make sure that they feel safe around me, that like, hey, this isn't contagious, this is just my immune system not reacting appropriately.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for sharing that. I think it's just important to hear because in daily practice, especially for many of us that see so much psoriasis, and especially because we know we have therapies that'll work so well, we just kind of brush up on at that point. So it's always nice just to take a second and really kind of address that. No, it is kind of a kind of a major change. So yeah, and I'd love to kind of hear what happened
Yeah,
next. And
and I think kind of what helped me is I was very open about my psoriasis diagnosis, and so when I talked to my friends, and they're like, "Oh, what's new?" and I was like, "Oh, I got diagnosed with incurable disease this week," but I told them how I had psoriasis. Luckily, it's not fatal or anything, but and what I found when I was sharing my diagnosis was that there were so many other people who were like, "Oh, yeah, I have psoriasis too," or I know someone else who has psoriasis, or like, "Hey, my uncle has it, or my dad had it," and I realized that I wasn't as alone as I thought I was because before I wasn't familiar with it. I didn't know anyone else who had it, but then once I started talking to people about it, I realized just how many people this disease affects. So that was an eye-opening moment to make me feel
yeah.
like I'm not alone in this journey.
Yeah, and so common, exactly. So it's amazing that you are talking about it and more people are just sharing their stories. And I see on Instagram now a lot of like really cool posts where people are putting up even like photos of their psoriasis and just being open about it. And exactly like just kind of just feeling that lots of people have this. And then Dr. Liao, that we'll talk about in a second as well, he had such an amazing point about because he studies a lot of the genetics of psoriasis and how
Hmm.
evolutionarily it's been very protective. So people who've had psoriasis, it's been almost good thing because it's protected them against some viruses and things like that in the past. But now with modern medicine, we don't have a lot of those things that are killing us, like viruses and different things. So then just having it is not necessarily creating that evolutionary advantage. So it's kind of interesting how over time things develop depending on like what our society is doing at this point in time.
Yeah. No, it's
So it's all
interesting
just
how
how you
like
look at it.
yeah, it's interesting how like certain of those genetic factors are created to help a certain issue, but
Mhm.
then it has that side effect.
Yeah.
But yeah, like you were saying, because we don't have those viral infections anymore, like it's kind of like a leftover, I guess the epigenetics or something
Yeah.
that create that. But yeah, one thing also is that when I was telling my sister that I had psoriasis, like her first response was, "Oh, like Kim Kardashian," and
Yeah, that's true.
I had no idea Kim Kardashian had psoriasis. So that was like, oh, okay,
Yeah,
that's great that like a celebrity even has psoriasis. So it made me feel better that I'm not
absolutely.
alone. But then it also
Yeah.
kind of made me feel concerned because with someone who has all the money and power and vested interest in their physical appearance, like Kim Kardashian,
Yeah.
if she was struggling with it, then like what chance did I have, right? So there's also a
That's
bit
true,
of
just kind of the both of it. And
disheartening.
Kylie has it too, her younger
Oh,
sister.
really?
Got
Oh,
yeah,
did
so
not.
that's two of the Kardashians. Well, three, I
Man,
guess, is
I
the
need
mom
to
as
catch up
well.
on my Kardashians. I
Chris
did not
Chris
know
Jenner as well.
that.
I watch way too much of that stuff. I shouldn't, but I know way too many details going into that. Yeah, and then how did
So
you find the journey with like the dermatologist and the healthcare and that piece of it? Because now you have to kind of do more visits than you might have thought. And how did all of that
yeah,
go?
yeah. So yeah, then I had to start the whole treatment journey of like how was I going to manage this disease, and so my dermatologist recommended clobetasol, topical corticosteroid, and so I mean I did that twice daily for about 2 weeks, but I think my psoriasis was just too severe that it didn't really have much of an impact. And so after that regimen failed, he recommended a one of the biologics. And like for me, I was a little hesitant to take it. I was just concerned about the immunosuppressant side effects potentially, the fact you had to be on it for the rest of your life, the high price tag, and so I was like, let me see if there's any other treatments, and I wasn't sure if there were any other treatments available, but I was just like, let me just think about it for a bit. And so I think like most people, I went to Google and I was like, you know what, let me try to see what else is out there. And there's all sorts of random blog posts and articles and like, quote unquote natural cures. And I tried them all, right? I tried the vegan diet. I tried the gluten-free diet. I tried the keto diet. I went vegan and keto for a while, which I couldn't
Oh,
eat
that's
anything
hard.
for.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I pretty much survived on pumpkin seeds and starved myself
Right.
for 2 weeks. Um, and the whole time I was taking pictures of my skin. I used this app called Imagine, And so it was kind of cool because I could take pictures of different parts of my body as I tried different diets and different creams and
Yeah.
probiotics and alkaline water and Ayurvedic solutions. And so every time I tried one of these treatments, I I would see if it had an impact on my skin, and so there would be like a time lapse where I could kind of see how it affected. And nothing I tried broke the cycle of psoriasis. Like it flared up, the dead skin would slow away, and then it would come back again. And
Yeah.
so I wasn't really seeing anything, despite this like live science experiment I was doing to my body. And then I talked to a friend who gave me a great advice. Was like, hey, instead of Google, why not use Google Scholar and try to really understand the nature of your disease? And I was like, that's great. Like, let me find like peer reviewed research of actual like physicians and scientists who have some sort of clinical data of seeing that something worked, as opposed to some random blog post. And so that was an interesting journey where I kind of like just delved into like the science and the pathology of psoriasis. And occasionally, I think when you do Google Scholar, you do hit some paywalls. And for me, I was lucky enough to have some friends who work for academic institutions that could access certain
Yeah.
articles, and so I kind of leaned on them. And I'm sure they didn't get this question very often of like, hey, can you send me this academic article that I'm hitting a paywall with? And so I had a bunch. I leaned on my friends to send me a lot of these articles, and I just consumed it. I mean, the Goeckerman therapy especially started in the 1920s, and so there was a lot to consume. But anyway, it was one article in from UCSF that was published in 2013 that Dr. Liao was one of the authors of. And this was the first time I came across this treatment called the Goeckerman therapy. And so they did this treatment at UCSF. And the thing that blew me away was that there was one line that said 100% of patients that went into their clinic had like PASI 75 improvement from baseline in 3 months or less. And I was like, what? 100% of patients had a response to this treatment, when everything I tried didn't have like a glimmer of response. And so I was like, okay, let me unpack this even further. And in the article, it listed, I guess it was like a physician to physician piece, but it listed like a 24-step process on how they did the treatment. And I wasn't, there was a lot of questions with this. I was intrigued. I was living in Chicago at the time. I was traveling for work to Baltimore, and even though the treatment seemed really effective, that they were saying that it was more effective than, had high efficacy than biologics, was super
Yeah.
safe, had really long remission times. And so I was like, this seems too good to be true. But the challenge of it was that I had to fly to San Francisco essentially and be there for 6 weeks, go into the clinic for 6 hours a day. And that was really time consuming. And
Yeah.
whether or not I could take 6 weeks off of work, find temporary housing, whether or not insurance would cover it, all sorts of questions arose. But I was like, you know what? I have the 21st step process, and I did a lot more research on the Goeckerman therapy when I focused on that. And I was like, maybe I can try to do this. And this is not recommended for anyone to do, but I was just like, maybe I can do this on myself. And so I bought the coal tar ointment on Amazon, and I got the plastic wrap, and the other component, the critical component of it, was UVB light. And for that, you needed a prescription to get like a home-based UVB device, and they're really expensive. And so I was like, you know what? If this was kind of invented in the 1920s, like maybe they used the sun or some sort of source like that. And so I looked up when UVB light was present in the atmosphere, and it was like from the hours like 10 to 2 during the summer months, depending on the latitude and all this stuff. And so I was in Baltimore, and because I needed to get exposure to sunlight between the hours of 10 to 2, it was difficult to slip out of work. And so I would leave during my lunch hours back to my hotel room, and then I stripped into my shorts, and then I would just sunbathe for like 10 minutes on one side and 10 minutes on the other side. And then at night, I applied the coal tar and then wrapped it with saran wrap, and just that 6 hours of just letting it be on your skin. I just kind of went to sleep and let it be. And so that was kind of my approach to it. And a part of me was really worried that like my manager or my boss would drive by my hotel room during lunch and find me, half naked on a picnic bench and being like, Shawn, why are you half naked on a
You're
picnic bench?
supposed to be at
I can
work.
explain. It's not what it looks like.
Yeah.
Oh
my
but
gosh, I love it. Yeah, no, that's amazing. And you're totally right. Those are the components of it. It's the tar, it's the UVB, and it should be easier to have access to those things than having to go through that, because it's safe enough. I mean, with the light boxes you can get through the companies, I mean, you could burn yourself. I think that's the main
mhm.
worry, and that's why prescriptions are needed for it. But with the right education, the right hands, it's totally something that could be done. And then, so yeah, what happened after the 6 weeks, and how are your sheets doing? I'm just imagining you sleeping with coal tar for 6 hours. Anyone who's
Yeah.
worked with coal tar, it has a very, like I did my psoriasis fellowship back in the day with Dr. Liao, Dr. Koo. So we would be sitting next to our Goeckerman patients and you would just smell like coal tar. It's a very, very seriously odorous and staining kind of compound, but you get used to it too after a while, I think. So
Yeah.
yeah,
I had to play with
how
it.
was the handling of the tar?
Yeah, I used latex gloves to handle it, and
Yeah,
it is safe. The issue is
yeah,
it does have like a
super safe,
slight
just very
smell to it.
medicinal, just very
Yeah,
medicinal. Exactly.
yeah, and I was in a hotel, so I was like, okay, if so that kind of like mitigated some of my concerns with the bed sheets. But
Yeah,
luckily, like
yeah.
it didn't. I guess the over the counter isn't as potent as the ones that they use
That's
in the
possible.
clinic.
You're right. Actually, the over the counter is not so. Yes, actually, I'm curious to see how it did work with the over the counter version and
Yeah, so it
just
didn't stain
UV
any
light.
clothes or any of my sheets, at least like what I noticed or
Yeah,
experienced. So maybe it was just the lack of that potency of using like the LCD instead of the actual crude coal
yeah.
tar. But within a few days, my psoriasis turned like a light pink with
Hmm.
like some sort of hyperpigmentation as thrown about, and so like I was like, I don't know what's happening here, but I've never seen my plaques look like this. And
Wow.
so I was like, okay, let me keep trying this. And so I would continue to do the coal tar as much as I can at night, and then I would continue to do the UVB light as long as like the weather cooperated, and I was able to escape out of work during lunch. And I remember like some of my colleagues would ask me for lunch during that time, and the way I would respond is I would look outside, and if it was raining and cloudy, I would say yes. And if it was like bright and sunny, I'd be like, oh, I'm sorry, I got a thing to
I
do.
gotta go. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think they figured out that was the
Yeah.
determining factor. But I after a
That's
few weeks
fantastic.
of being on this treatment and my plaques like seeming like it was healing, I was just like, let me go see my dermatologist again to see like, hey, what was happening? What is happening to my skin right now? And so I went back and it was interesting because like she didn't think it was healing, because she said that she's like, if you close your eyes and rub your skin, it's needs to feel smooth, and if it still feels bumps, then it still means that you have psoriasis there. And I was like, yeah, but I think it was a lot different than it was before, and so
Hmm.
and so I asked her. I remember asking her like, hey, she seemed skeptical of what I was doing, and I was like, why do you seem skeptical? And she's like, well, I've seen people do light therapy before, but it always comes back. And so I was like, oh, okay. That was kind of disheartening. And she was like, I recommend one of these biologics. And I was like, let me see how this goes first. And so I did it for 6 weeks until like September when UVB light is less present during the winter. So I stopped then. And then my psoriasis went away at this point. And
Wow.
there was hyperpigmentation on my legs. It completely cleared from my arms, my chest, and on my face, luckily. And the only indication that I had psoriasis was the hyperpigmentation on my legs, which was interesting. And what was also interesting is I didn't do any treatment to my face. Like, I didn't want to experiment with it. I didn't put any coal
Yeah.
tar when it came to like the
Right.
UVB light. I would put like a towel over my face. But it was interesting that the plaques also
Yeah.
disappeared from my
Also
face as
disappeared there.
well.
Yeah. That's
And then,
fantastic. And then, yeah.
yeah,
Oh no, sorry. Go ahead. Yeah, I'm just gonna say, did it fully clear, and how long did it stay away? This is like just such a great story.
yeah, I mean, it stayed away since. So it's been 6 years, and I haven't had a flare back.
Really? Wow. So just
Yeah,
one Goeckerman therapy or pseudo home Goeckerman. That's
yeah,
amazing.
yeah. It was
That's an
it was
amazing story.
Yeah, I do think I was probably a rare case of like it working so well, because usually the literature says that it's like a 1 month, or sorry, 1 year remission.
Well,
Um,
usually, yep,
mhm.
exactly. Like we would see in the psoriasis center, we would have a lot of our patients come back and do the same therapy. There are other types I'm sure you've seen like the Dead Sea and other places where
Mhm.
people go to stay for a few months and do this kind of combination of light and topical therapies. Usually it comes back for most. So this is incredible that, for you it stayed away. And I think it's really great story for others to hear too. It's not impossible to cure these things. I mean, we always, when you come to see us, we're going to sound skeptical and we're going to say no because the data shows you'll probably have it and you have to
Yeah,
do this and that. But I mean, you are just the proof that it's possible. So I think that's just important for, yeah, like you are the proof that it's possible. So it's just really important, I think, for people to hear that, because sometimes in the middle of it, you just kind of need hope and kind of things to look for. And I'd love to hear then from your, because your personal story is so amazing. And then how did you kind of turn that into the amazing, the work you're doing now with Dr. Liao and
yeah,
Solay?
yeah. And I can understand if a physician being skeptical of what I did, because if you had a patient coming in being like, "Hey, I tried this treatment where I'm laying out on a picnic bench, in the middle of the workday," and I could see that there was some skepticism with that.
Yeah.
So I understand. I What was interesting was that, so after I healed, I wanted to share my experience, but I also didn't want to be like, "Hey, there's a great treatment for psoriasis that I found," but if it came back suddenly, then I don't want to be like, "Okay, this really wasn't sustainable." So I waited a good few months, about like 8 months or so, and when it didn't come back, I was like, okay, I need to share this.
Yeah.
I have one data point, but I need to get more data points on this. And so one thing I did was I went on Instagram and I just showed my before and after pictures, since I was like really
Hmm.
diligent about taking pictures of my skin. And I was like, I think I might have something that is really useful in terms of like treating psoriasis. If you know anyone who has psoriasis and is interested, can you let me know? And I'd love to share my story. And so then I started fielding a bunch of phone calls because I got a lot of
A
inbound.
lot of
Uh,
interest, I'm sure. Yeah.
yeah, and so I just talked to people told people about my story, told people about what I did, and I was like, if you are interested in trying what I did, can you just let me know what the results are? Because I just want more data points. And so I kind of had my own amateur, yeah, clinical study in some sense, and I got a bunch of patients, like a bunch of people, like 15 people or so, that were interested in trying the treatment. But after I followed up with them, um, and I was just like, "Hey, how are things going? What are the challenges?" And they tried to do the same thing I did, where they got over-the-counter coal tar, they tried to get sunlight, but nobody, and this is the disheartening part of it, was that nobody got the same response that I did.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
so I was like, okay, this is not something that's repeatable, that you can just take my story and run with it, without and get the same results. So like maybe I was just like an outlier, and so that was a bit disheartening. But one thing I did do was, I like that one UCSF article. I I emailed all the authors, and I just said thank you.
Oh,
This article like had a profound impact on my life, and it changed me for the better. And if it wasn't for that, like I wouldn't have had this result. And I'm sure a lot of academic researchers don't get a lot of thank you letters, maybe. So
yeah.
yeah, I
No,
figured,
absolutely. No, it's so amazing what you did. It's just it's true, because I think academics and medicine in general, you do a lot of work and you put a lot of years in, but it's just amazing to hear the actual stories where things worked. So
yeah, yeah. And
that's
so some
fantastic.
people some people responded and was like, "Oh, that's great to hear," and some people didn't respond. And Dr. Liao was actually the only one to respond and said, "Hey, that's great. Like, I'm glad you got this result, But it's also interesting that you're able to do Goeckerman therapy at home. Like, we've never heard of anybody who was able to do that. Like, can we talk? And personally, honestly, I was really hoping that someone would respond to me like that, because I had so many questions of someone who was an expert in Goeckerman therapy, of like, why isn't this more available to folks? Like, what happened to it? Why, you know, and I had a whole host of questions that came up. And so I called, so we called each other, and I told him my story, and then I peppered him with all these questions about Goeckerman therapy and what he's seen in the clinic. And especially one question I remember asking was that, like, hey, I didn't apply Goeckerman therapy on my face, but it went away. Like, did you see that with some of your patients at the clinic? And he's like, yeah, sometimes there's some places that's hard to reach, but we see when they clear, it clears in those areas too. And I was like, wow, this is fascinating. And then he proposed that, like, hey, would you mind if we teamed up and wrote a paper together, and how you're able to do Goeckerman therapy at home, like how that change of the site of treatment was, like, how you experienced that. And I was like, yeah, I would love to, write a paper with you. And so we wrote a paper, we got it published. And so that was really exciting. And it was about, like, my experience, my story and doing Goeckerman therapy at home, and then a physician perspective on that. And for the most part, it was like, we don't recommend this, without any sort of physician oversight. And but it was just nice to kind of, like, prove out this one, data point that
It's fantastic.
it's possible.
Yeah.
And then
That's so great.
and then I had the idea of, like, hey, like, I really do feel like the Goeckerman therapy is so effective and safe and such a strong option for patients. But the problem with it is so inaccessible. There's only 3 clinics in the US that offer it. You got to be local. You got to be
It's so
close.
hard. Yeah.
Yeah.
And even if you're local, it's kind of hard to take that kind of time away. Like you were saying, if you have a job, if you have kids, if you have life,
Yeah.
it ended up being sometimes some of our patients were maybe even retired, or it ended up being a very specific subset who could actually do it, where they can come where the clinic is open, versus you can just do it at night, for example, and, on your own time. So a lot of barriers. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I was like, Dr. Liao, I think there might be an opportunity where we can leverage telemedicine to be able to offer this treatment at home. But I told them my experience of my amateur clinical study, and how, it was like that idea really wasn't proving it out based on, what I was just, like, sharing my story and having people repeat it. But I was like, if we're able to get them a UVB device, if we're able to get them physician oversight, and because there is an art form to it. Like, some patients need to get that concentrated prescription strength coal tar ointment for it to work. And then you need someone to guide you in doing UVB light properly, so you don't have any burning. You protect yourself. You could do it safely, and, like, you need that expertise to walk that patient through the therapy and adjust the therapy according to how their skin is responding. And I was like, this is my idea. I don't know how successful it would be, or if this would work, but would you like to be a part of it in some way? And he's like, yes, I would love that. And so that's kind of how that started, where we teamed up and kind of co-founded Solay. And then he brought in Dr. Brutani, who's another expert in Goeckerman therapy at UCSF. And then it was the 3 of us. And then we brought in, and then there was a nurse that they worked with for 10 years, Sarah, who's the heart and soul of our treatment now. Oh, you know Sarah too?
Yeah, we worked very closely together back in the day.
Yeah,
at the Psoriasis Center.
She's wonderful. And then we recruited Dr. Ohm to help us. And we had a couple of case studies where there was one patient, 55 years old, and we sent the UVB machine. We provided some oversight, and he's had psoriasis since he was 15. And then so for, like, 40 years, and after doing this treatment, he completely cleared for the first time. And so it was kind of, and then it was such a validating experience for us to be like, hey, now we're seeing something that's interesting. And we're like, okay, but that's another data point. Let's see if we could do another kind of case study. And then we had another one who was a 34-year-old a patient with plaque psoriasis who was an ER nurse, and he was working a lot with COVID patients. So he was on Humira, but it only helped with like 80% of his psoriasis plaques. Like he still had plaques on his shins. And but his doctor told him to get off of Humira because he was at risk for COVID and all that. So it was a really interesting experiment of like, okay, if you're pulling off of Humira, but you're going to do this home Goeckerman therapy, like what is going to be your response? And after being on it for a few weeks, not only did the psoriasis not come back, but also cleared his shins as well.
Yeah.
So like, wow.
Those are stubborn areas. Exactly.
Yeah. So I was like, okay, now we have something that could be repeatable, and that that we could just bring. We kind of validating our operations and our treatment process, and so that's kind of how we started. And we're like, all right, let's really build this out and make this available to more patients. So we're available now in California, where we essentially send the patient everything that they need, and then we have telehealth sessions where the physician and Sarah, helps that patient as much as they need. Like a lot of touch points to make sure they're doing the therapy properly, how they're responding. We adjust it, and then we eventually want to move into Illinois next, which is what we're working on.
That's incredible. And a lot of times in clinic, before we prescribe a home therapy unit, home phototherapy unit, we might have the patient do like a month or 2 or 3 sometimes in our phototherapy unit just to get a concept of, can they do it safely, the eye protection, all of that. These patients, I presume they're fresh, not getting phototherapy, and then they're getting the home units. Curious to see what your experience has been. Like, are we too cautious in the clinic? Are people fine? They can figure it out pretty well. I mean, they do have Sarah, who is like a master at this. So they have really good guidance. I can't say they're doing it on their own, but via telehealth, I should say, is that adoption easy enough? Like, are people able to figure out home phototherapy units with guidance without having done it in the office first?
Yeah, it's so far what we've noticed is that there is, there might be an adherence issue where folks do get busy at home and they've got kids
Yeah.
and all these things. But what Sarah is great at is developing that relationship. And so, that those like weekly check-ins, or sometimes 2 to 3 times a week check-ins, especially in the beginning, to make sure that they're diligent with it. If they have any issues with how the machine operates, or how to put the coal tar, the ointment on, how to wrap it. And we're trying to find ways to make it easier for patients. So like, instead of using the plastic wraps, right now we're prototyping certain pants and like enclosed that you wear that's like reusable. So it's like easier to put on and it's not so cumbersome. And so I think those little innovations kind of just makes it easier for the patient experience to stick to it and do it safely.
And it's amazing because you're really focusing on this very specific thing. Whereas even when we were doing Goeckerman at the Psoriasis Center, we were also doing all the biologics, clinical trials, so many things going on that it might not been, on the forefront to, okay, let's innovate this small little piece that makes it better. Whereas if you could just focus on one thing, you're probably making it so much better in every iteration. And the cool thing about it is it's so timely, because even the last few Goeckerman centers, some are closing down, and even more barriers are coming up. So it's so timely for you to kind of keep this really long-term therapy alive in a way, as it is kind of being, because of all the barriers with insurance and space and all of those things. It really is kind of a dying art within the traditional healthcare system. So it's amazing that you guys are kind of keeping it alive, because even Dr. Koo would have a slide a long time ago when we had all the biologics, and we're so excited about how biologics work. And I do have to say, I'm a proponent of the biologics are great. So I do have to put that out there, and they're really safe, and even with COVID and all that. But he had a slide, and the newer biologics probably might beat Goeckerman now, but back then the biologics that we had, all these new science and amazing advents, and then he still had Goeckerman up on the slide, and it was the only one that was like 100%. So like this older therapy, even with all these new scientific advents. So that was like such a cool slide. I mean, they weren't head-to-head trials, but just kind of seeing how effective it is if done right. So it's incredible what you're doing. And I love that. Just thank you so much for sharing this journey and all the amazing things you guys are doing. And we'll put a link to any of the references or websites, anything like that in the show notes as well. And then we always ask, actually, since it's the Future of Dermatology podcast, anything you're specifically interested in the future of dermatology or excited about, or with Goeckerman, anything at all?
Yeah, and of course, with I think there's a lot of new treatments and innovation of treatments, and that's always like really important, and kind of like the future of any sort of healthcare. But I guess from my unique vantage point, what I would say is that we also need innovations in access to healthcare, because even if we're able to come up with a cure for a lot of disease, if no one can afford or access it, like what good would that cure be? So I guess when I think about the future of dermatology or healthcare in general, the parts where I think it is ripe for disruption is one aspect is like to rethink the whole like business model of medicine, right? Like we talk about moving away from fee for service into like a value-based care model, and ideally that's where I think America and healthcare would like to be. And but if you think about it, even like the Goeckerman therapy is super effective. It's safe. We're like children, the elderly, older adults, people who are immunocompromised can use it. Long remission times, but if it doesn't get coverage for a payer, then even though a lot of these biologics are tens of thousands of dollars, and Goeckerman therapy is a fraction of that price, there's still a barrier to entry for that. And with a value-based care model, it'd be a win-win-win for everybody. But what I noticed when I talk to payers is that there's a challenge for value-based care in that they have to invest in actuaries and risk assessment. And psoriasis, at least with one payer that I talked to, like isn't a big enough market for them to invest in a value-based care model. And so one of the challenges that where I hope there's some innovations is like, how do you make it easier for payers to switch over, lower those cost burdens for them to adopt value-based care models for different, disease areas. So that'd be one.
Absolutely.
And then the second thing is also the delivery of care, where I think telehealth is really important, being able to see patients wherever they are, that'll continue to be adopted. So whether you're in a rural area or have limitations in mobility, you could see a healthcare provider. There are some regulatory challenges that I see that, in my experience that I run into, like having to go state by state. It's a very slow rollout. So if there's some sort of, I don't know, that gets into asking the government and a change of law to make that regulatory process a little bit easier. So I'm not holding my breath on that one. And then finally, I think
absolutely.
Yeah.
I agree with all of that. And I think there are, hopefully it's coming sooner than we think, but making it physicians able to practice in multi-states, it's definitely coming, but it's slow.
Yeah, I agree. Like Dr. Leah and Dr. Butani are amazing physicians, but the patient in California is also the same as the patient in Ohio or Wisconsin.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's not like medicine has changed, but
that legislation is definitely coming down the pipeline. So hopefully it'll be here soon.
I think the final point I would like to make in terms of healthcare and places where I love to see innovation is that I think like healthcare is a very human experience. We sometimes think of scalability and efficiency, but kind of like undervalue the importance of that human relationship of building that patient-provider trust. One example in my own experience is that when I had psoriasis, I went to the dermatologist office 3 times, but I saw 3 different providers in that office. And sometimes I feel like when a patient has that fragmented experience, they don't feel fully seen. And that's kind of just like the nature of how we deliver care. And then we had one patient recently that had a severe form of eczema, and like he also, in his experience, he didn't have like a really strong like relationship with his provider, and so he had less of an incentive to adhere to the treatment or trust the treatment, and so there's a bit of a barrier in terms of like trust and understanding. And so one thing we noticed when Sarah was able to invest in a relationship with him, that he started to believe in the having trust in the system again, and being more open to certain medications or treatment options. But it all starts with that trust.
Oh,
So I think we need
100%.
to, was
And
that?
Sarah's just so fantastic too. So
Yeah.
she's such an amazing asset to
Yeah,
have.
absolutely. And so I think, I mean, from my vantage point, like I do want to tackle these things of how I want, where I think like healthcare should be. And, having like each patient be paired with a nurse and a physician for the entirety of the treatment, reinforcing that physician-patient relationship. I think that really helps them to trust in the system and adhere to the treatments, which is also a huge issue when it comes to any sort of dermatology treatments. So it might not be perfectly, scalable or efficient, but I do think that's where we need to get back to and start over from in a bit, in a way,
No,
and then
I
innovate from there.
100% agree. 100% agree. And that's what ends up just having better care for our patients, which is what we're all aiming to do. But thank you so much, Shawn. This has been so informative. Thank you for sharing your own personal story too. I know that's always incredible when others can hear and learn from. And it's just like you mentioned, the community. So thank you so much. It's been amazing having you.
Yeah, and thank you so much for creating this platform. I think you're doing a phenomenal job, and I really
Oh,
appreciate you inviting me on.
absolutely. Thanks again.
All right, thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Future of Dermatology podcast. Remember to hit that subscribe button and share the podcast with your friends. The more you share and subscribe, the more we'll be able to grow and share our dermatology knowledge. If you have burning dermatology questions, feel free to leave them in the comment below, and we would love to address them in a future episode. And please note that this podcast is not intended to substitute for medical advice from your doctor.